What are some of the classic stories that you tell about your experience, grade school and high school?
Well, growing up deaf, I did have an older deaf sister named Colleen. She's a year older than me, and I have 2 younger siblings. So it's kind of interesting. She was born about a year before me, and I came later. And my sister was diagnosed as deaf before I was. I was the second one to be found out as deaf, and my parents at the time didn't really have a ton of resources or access to a lot of information about what to do with deaf children. So they put me in an oral program. They taught me how to speak. I remember growing up going to speech therapy and also learning sign. We used what's called SimCom, signing and speaking at the same time. At home, we would sign, we would talk, we would go back and forth between the two. And growing up, that type of environment, that hearing environment, so to speak, growing up in school, I had interpreters for my classes all day. I remember all types of things. Like my sister Colleen had, well, she was said to have better hearing than I did. So she was actually placed in a mainstream program where she was really the only deaf person there. She didn't have interpreting services. She had to rely on lip reading her teachers and asking her classmates what the teachers had said. But in my program, there were other deaf students like me, so I had peers I could relate to, and interpreters, of course. So I did grow up in a hearing family, and I remember we would have family gatherings together. We would tend to get together a lot, our family, Christmas time, major holidays, you know how it is. And I remember as a young kid, when I was younger, communication with cousins and members of extended family. I don't remember any specific challenges or anything. I just remember we had a lot of fun. We used to play together and go on adventures together. I'm trying to think. One of my favorite memories was probably at my grandparents' house. It was either Thanksgiving or Christmas, and the whole family got together, and we went out in the woods and we were playing hide and seek. We were playing like Ghost Yard, tossing around a football, playing baseball, swimming, the works. It was great. Sometimes I would feel kind of isolated when I would see everybody talking and not really know what was going on. So I would feel like, okay, how do I get the attention back to me? So I do something dramatic and of course have my 15 minutes of attention, 15 minutes of fame. Everybody would remember, oh, look, there's James, there's Joey. I always kind of had that desire to perform, to have people watch me, and I guess that's just a passion I've had since I was born. I was always kind of a class clown. I was always, doing stupid jokes and stuff just to get the attention for 15 seconds, even if it was just that, So that was, growing up in a mainstream program. I was in a mainstream program all through high school, and I graduated from Lasser High School, and after I graduated, that's when I went to Gallaudet University. And Gallaudet is the only deaf school in the country that's founded exclusively for deaf students. And that experience in DC was amazing. Going into an all-signing environment, it was just phenomenal. It was amazing because growing up, so I graduated from Lasser High School, and I went on, which I had a mainstream background my whole life until graduating high school, and then went to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., where, it's kind of like the deaf mecca in this country for undergraduate and graduate work. So I went from that total mainstream environment to suddenly being surrounded by sign language. I mean, there were, of course, some people who spoke English, but peers, professors, people in the cafeteria, everybody signed. It was a completely accessible ASL environment that I had never really experienced before. And all of a sudden, I felt this sense of belonging that I'd never known, where I could understand and participate anywhere I went. And my sister, Colleen, was also there. She's a year older than me, so it was nice to feel like that familial bond, too, while I was away from home. And I remember I went to Gallaudet in 2007, and it was just an amazing experience for me. I learned so much about just in terms of socialization and social adaptations, because growing up around hearing people, I felt like I always had to act out to get attention. But suddenly, when I was in an all-deaf, all-signing environment, I didn't feel that demand, You saw people just having conversation naturally. It was easier for me to join in the conversation because I understood better how to participate. And all of a sudden, I needed to figure out what to do with this passion for acting and performing. And I was able to channel it into stage work. I began to study drama, and that really was a major growing experience for me. I didn't know, for sure what I was going to do with it, but I thought, well, maybe I'll become an actor. When I was younger, I didn't really think of it very seriously as something I wanted to pursue as a profession, But all of a sudden, I thought, I had always thought, how would you earn a living like that? It was always just sort of a thing I did for fun. But when I got to Gallaudet, and I remember taking this class, Education 101, and the professor was giving us a lecture and said, all right, go ahead and make a lesson plan. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I have to make a lesson plan for every single day of the year. This is what every teacher does. And am I going to do that for the next 30 years? I just thought, there's no way I'd be able to deal with that. So, okay, that's not for me, I thought. And I started taking classes in the theater program. And that's when I started to realize that theater wasn't all about just, being on stage and acting. There are a lot more complicated components behind the scenes. People who work as dramaturgs, people who work as directors, scenic designers, lighting designers, costume designers, set carpenters. There's so many roles that I had never really thought about, but all of a sudden the possibilities were endless. So I took the opportunity not just to study acting, but to study everything involved in theater and stagecraft. I wanted to try my hand at everything and experience as much as I could while I was there at Gallaudet. I worked as a stage manager. I studied design, lighting, electrics, directing, of course, performing, the works. I wanted to really get the full experience. And that really, now I have on my resume, I have all of those wonderful experiences, and it informed me a lot. It's nice to be able to tell people that, you can make a living in theater. There are many ways that people do it. And it kind of shuts people up sometimes because they don't expect to hear that. So those 4 years at Gallaudet University were like theater nonstop, everything. All my classes were great, and the theater program, and probably one of my biggest successes at Gallaudet was directing a play. I directed a play called Noises Off at Gallaudet University. And the play is really challenging. It's incredible farce. And on top of that, Gallaudet at the time didn't really have student-directed productions, or they hadn't since 1991. So from 1991 to 2010, there hadn't been student-produced work, student-directed work at the university. So that's quite a long time, right? Almost 20 years, I guess. And it was kind of shocking for me, the challenge to recruit students, to play the roles and do all the work behind the scenes, and simultaneously take on responsibility of, our theater had planned to submit a piece to the Kennedy Center. They had a what's called the American College Theater Festival at the Kennedy Center. And it's like a regional competition for different theaters and theater programs where students come to compete for, best play or what have you. And we really wanted to get in, so we really worked our tails off to get this show to be presentable. And we had an adjudicator come from the festival who really loved the work, and we got into the regional level of competition, which was fantastic. So that for me was a tremendous accomplishment. All of the work and all of the energy and passion that I invested and that we invested in putting that together is something that I'll have with me forever. I'll always cherish those memories because it really paid off. And the result was a success. I mean, of course, we didn't get into the national competition, unfortunately. That was slightly disappointing. But when I look back, I'm able to really think of just the scale of what I did and what we did is so enormous, and really it's something I'll always cherish. When I graduated in 2011, I went to work right away for the National Theater of the Deaf, which is based now in Connecticut. And the National Theater of the Deaf has a touring company that goes around to different schools and different locations presenting the play. And at that time, the company was just 3 of us. It was myself and 2 women driving around in a van across the United States, going from state to state, from school to school, venue to venue for 2 years performing this show we had built together. And that was, I remember just that experience really informed me a lot as a deaf actor. As a deaf person, really, people aren't very familiar with deaf culture and our language, our culture. That's not something that our mainstream audiences or hearing people in general are familiar with. So going to different schools and seeing young students in elementary school who are just amazed by sign and just even that initial exposure to deaf culture, being able to share with them our experiences and giving them that opportunity to be exposed was really, really satisfying for me. I remember, meeting deaf students, having them see deaf professionals at work, deaf artists at work, is really, really beneficial for them and for us. We would do workshops with them, calling on them to reach into their imagination, to perform, and that was really gratifying. I loved doing that. So I worked with NTD for 2 years doing that kind of work. And then...
What was the nature of the play that you put on as you were traveling around with your small group?
Oh, sure. National Theater of the Deaf, their mission is to educate and entertain children. And most of our performances are very educational. Typically, there's an educational component where we teach sign, we teach drama, classic stories and fables, and we use props and costumes and different things like that to enrich the educational experience and encourage their imaginations. Teachers, principals, students are able then to take the plays that we've put on with them and develop lesson plans so that the learning can continue even after the performance. And the play that we did, I mean, it changed a bit as we moved around, but there were 4 different plays plays within the production that we had. There were two that were geared for educational development. Well, not just for children, but for adults, for interpreters, ASL students, college students. And the other two productions were, there was a tour of Journeys of Identity, which was a historical play that was about the history of Gallaudet, who founded American School for the Deaf, the first school for the deaf in America, and how that came to be. We did that play. And there was another play, it was called A Child's Christmas in Wales. Wales, sorry. The other play was called A Child's Christmas in Wales. And so that one was kind of like the holiday special Christmas show that we did. It was the type of play that, those are the kind of the plays that I did with NTD for those few years. So after 2 years of working with National Theater of the Deaf, I was offered a role, the character Billy in Tribes, and I began this whole journey with Tribes in Boston, in that production there. It was really my good fortune to get the role, because when I was working, while I was at Gallaudet doing Noises Off, I had a very good friend of mine, Annie, who happens to be a lighting designer. She worked with me on Noises Off to design the lights, and she's also deaf, so that was a really great collaboration. And she was working in Boston at the same time with the director who was directing Tribes, and they had worked on a few productions together before then. So when Annie found out that this director was going to mount Tribes, she asked, do you have anybody in mind for Billy? And the director honestly didn't. Bevan, she had no idea she was gonna start the search, hoping to find somebody. So Annie put my name out there, and at the time I was working at Gallaudet in a summer camp, and the theater in Boston got in contact with me asking me to come audition. So I said, yeah, sure. I mean, I was working at camp, but I made arrangements, and I got the day off, and a friend and I drove 5 hours to Boston, and yeah, my hair was a mess. I was completely disheveled. It looked like I had just come out of the woods, like a He-Man or something. We got lost in Boston driving around. We couldn't find the freaking theater. My phone was dead. I couldn't get in touch with the director. I was panicking, and ultimately we made it, and I apologized profusely and gave my audition, got back in the car, and took the trek back. Then I guess they got in touch with me a few days later asking me to do a callback audition, the second round of auditions. So I had to get a day off again, take the trip, the 5-hour journey to Boston. This time we got to the place, the right place this time. And we did the callback, drove all the way back to camp, and then I guess it was just maybe a few hours later they offered me the role. So after all that, it was really great. We did that production of Tribes in Boston, was at Speakeasy Stage, which is a small theater company, but very popular. I mean, everybody in Boston knows it, and people go there because they get, they have a great reputation, and Tribes was no different. We got great reviews, and for me, it was really a really, really enriching experience, because I had never spoken on stage before. I never used my voice on stage. I'd always performed roles in sign language. All of my training is in ASL for the stage and how to translate appropriately for the stage, but I had never done a speaking role, so that was completely brand new, and I just kind of had to dive in. And the director would call out to me from the house, speak louder, project. And so I did my best to figure out what that meant and how to do that. And it took a lot of work, a lot of training, a lot of practice, but it was really, really a wonderful experience that I gained so much from. After the production in Boston, I was offered the role of Billy in the production I did next in Washington, D.C. And the director actually flew to Boston to see me perform and have an audition. So that was really great. And when I got to D.C., we did the show again with an entirely new cast. We had to go through a rehearsal process from scratch, and I had to work on my speaking and, of course, working on that British dialect to try to perfect that. And so once again, we were in rehearsals. Once again, we put a lot into the show, and the result was overwhelmingly positive. And it was really nice to be back there in my DC roots and the deaf community there, and to have them be able to experience this amazing show. And now, here I am again doing Tribes here in Berkeley, here at Berkeley Rep, here in California, and bringing Tribes to a whole new audience. We actually just did our first performance for a deaf audience last night, and it was overwhelmingly, resoundingly positive, and I'm so grateful. The response from people in general has been outstanding. And for me, what I like to say, Billy and Billy's story is about a deaf man who's raised oral, so he's in a hearing family that speaks, and he speaks and reads lips, and his family has never been really open to the idea of sign language as a possibility. They've kind of always demeaned it. This is a very academic family who loves debate and argument, and all of that is verbal. And so Billy has grown up without sign language, trying to read lips, trying to speak, until he happens to meet a hearing young woman who knows sign language, and she happens to be losing her hearing, so she's going deaf. And they hit it off right away and end up having an amazing romantic relationship. And while that relationship is blossoming, Billy is falling in love with the deaf community and slowly disengaging from that highly academic banter of his hearing family. And for me, this play, I think it really exemplifies something that everybody can relate to. Anybody who's hearing, anybody who's deaf, people with all sorts of disabilities can identify with the feeling of looking for a place to belong, trying to find that tribe that feels like home to us, finding other people who are like us, finding that semblance of sameness. And then what happens in the dynamics of our family and our relationships when we do find that, especially when, because Billy's caught between two worlds or two tribes. He's his hearing family which is all he's ever known, and now suddenly the deaf community, which is a whole new world to him. So when Billy tries to invite his family to adapt to this new way of life, they're completely resistant to it. And that's really hard for him, because all of a sudden he's found this new place where he belongs in the signing and the deaf community. And in general, deaf and hearing audience members have all come up to me and all tend to say the same thing, that they really feel for Billy and they really identify with this play because they know what it's like to be an outcast in some way, shape, or form, just to be the black sheep who's different from everybody else. And we all can identify with being an outcast in our family in some way, or in some way in our lives, feeling like, I don't belong here. Where do I belong? And am I willing to change for others, or others willing to change for me out of love, because we love each other? And I think I've heard so many stories. People have come up to me after the show and said that, the message of this play is so poignant, because it touches everybody. I think everybody really, everybody's values and their beliefs can be seen in this play, and everybody can find a way to identify with it because of that story.
So last night you had the after play discussion. How did the participation in that discussion compare with after play discussions from other plays you've done? In terms of, it looked to me like there were over half, maybe 2/3 of the audience who stayed for that discussion, which struck me as most unusual. I took in 2 performances yesterday, and in both cases I wound up talking to people on both sides of me in a very animated conversation. So how does that compare to other productions you've done?
This production, I think, is really, it's so beneficial for so many people to see, because we all share that similar idea of wanting to belong, and that's what this play is really about, this tribe, this family. So opening up discussion about just really examining the play, the context, where this family comes from, and how people of different backgrounds relate, whether they're hearing or deaf, how they can relate to each other through this play is fantastic. It's really amazing. And the show is interesting. And the conversation that we had last night after this production and the talk back were particularly interesting, because you could really see how this play plants seeds in the minds of people who have come to see it. And it's amazing what theater can do, the way that theater can plant those seeds and germinate ideas that people will ruminate on moving forward. And what they begin to learn here is just a step in the journey of what they stand to learn after seeing it.
I belong to Toastmasters. Are you familiar with Toastmasters? It's an international organization devoted to improving your public speaking and your leadership skills. And an example I've always said is, if you can stand in front of a group and persuade them to a course of action, by definition, you are a leader. And last night, although there were performers on stage who had much more experience than you did, the focus was really on you and your experience, and you led that discussion to a large degree. Do you see yourself as becoming more of a leader as a result of this particular play, or what do you think?
Certainly, I do think that more and more I am becoming an advocate, as a deaf actor representing the deaf community. I see myself, getting more involved in not just in tribes, but in other productions of other plays in the theater world. And of course, I'll be, an ambassador in some ways, and my experience will inform that. But I'm also aware that I have this responsibility as an actor, especially as a deaf actor, to bring information and experiences of my life as a deaf person and of the deaf community to the stage. I know that this is a tremendous responsibility to educate people who are probably completely unaware of the deaf world and the deaf experience. And it's just, the fact that they're ignorant, I can't hold that against them. I have to be here to bridge that gap, to expose them and educate them. And that's definitely an important part of my role, and I'm very conscious of it. It's on my mind all the time, and I don't make light of it. As a deaf person, as a deaf performer, I recognize that I need to advocate and educate, and that's part of my journey. And something about tribes, doing tribes, and in this production and in the previous productions, I've felt the responsibility as a deaf actor, not only to be just an actor, but to make the effort to educate people, to sit down with people, talk with them, teach audiences about deaf culture, teach other performers about it. It's a dual responsibility that I have.
I think one of the great lessons of that performance last night was not only the play itself, but as a hearing audience, watching, seeing how many people were signing. They've probably never seen so many people sign before in their whole life. And well, this is really, a whole new world.
Right, it is for them.
But I'd like to go back and ask a couple questions about teachers that you've had. Who are some of the most impressive teachers you've had, both pre-Gallaudet and at Gallaudet? Do any of them stand out? I've only got one or two in my whole collection, and I've been going to school all my life.
No, I get it, yeah.
Okay.
A teacher.
Well,
I guess the definition of teacher can be interpreted in a lot of ways. Is it somebody who leaves a classroom, or is it somebody who teaches from life experience? Because I feel like growing up in a mainstream school, I had a hard time connecting with some of my teachers because they were always hearing, and we went through an interpreter. So, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Just in general, deaf students in a mainstream program, in a program with other hearing students, don't really find that bond. But when they have a deaf teacher, all of a sudden there's this ability to relate and connect. And my school, there weren't many deaf teachers, unfortunately. We had interpreters, and most of the interpreters in the school became good friends of mine because we could relate to each other. I had one interpreter in particular who I think she was probably the best teacher I ever had, because she really knew how to work with me, how to connect with me. She had an understanding of the deaf community. She was an advocate for the deaf community. So while she was interpreting for a 5th grade boy, she brought all of this to the table. And people that I've always looked up to are the people who take the time to listen, to sit and talk with me and work with me. Even in an all-hearing environment where everything's going by so quickly. So this interpreter who took the time to really relate and explain and talk with me made a tremendous impact. Unfortunately, that interpreter became a very good friend of mine, but I didn't have that interpreter for my entire educational experience. After middle school, that was it. Once I got to high school, it was a different program, different interpreters, different teachers. So it was sad. It was sad to lose that relationship. But when I got to Gallaudet, I felt much more connected to the professors there, especially the deaf professors. There was one professor at Gallaudet University who really, really encouraged me. And also, well, this particular professor who isn't there any longer, but was a professor in the theater department at the time, we really developed a really close relationship, a close friendship. Sitting around the table, bringing our experiences together and really talking. And he really, really pushed me and motivated me. And we had some heated arguments over the course of our relationship. But in the end, really, the truth is, I grew so much from everything that he exposed me to, everything that he taught me. I learned a lot from him. And as a person and as an actor, I think in both of those ways, I really grew.
Okay. You're married, right?
Nope.
No? Okay. Have a question about plasticity of the brain.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the concept? That
Elaborate.
the brain, various sections of the brain perform certain functions. And when something happens like being hard of hearing or being deaf, that section of the brain readapts for something else and makes another skill probably more intense than what it does for the average public. Do you have a feeling that you've picked up another skill to compensate for the hearing loss? You kind of alluded to it in the play where, you recognize that your brother has a real problem. Nobody else in the family does, but...
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's interesting. If for example, if I were to suddenly become blind right now, it's not like my sense of touch or smell would drastically improve all of a sudden, but it takes practice. It takes, like you said, adaptation and development of skills. I mean, we all have the same skills or the same human competencies, and it's just how we hone those and which senses we really rely on and hone is what eventually gets emphasized. Because I'm deaf, I think, I've been deaf since I was very young. I've had more practice adapting to a visual world, whether it's by speech reading, signing, reading, just taking in language through my eyes and taking in the world through my eyes. And I've really honed those senses, that sense of sight and tactile motor skills, like anything, like say with practicing the piano, the more you practice, the more proficient you'll be. So I guess, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess what I'm thinking more is reading body language. Certainly what people say sometimes is not what they really mean, and you're not distracted by what they say.
Exactly. Yeah. Deaf people, but I mean, it's true for deaf people in general. We really rely on our bodies to communicate. Sign language isn't a language of the hands, it's a language of the body, the face, and there are so many nuances that the whole body lends to the communication process. So deaf people are really adept at noticing reactions and can tell sometimes what people are thinking based on their physicality and their behavior. Absolutely. So yeah, that's definitely something that I can say. Like, I can read body language pretty well, and sometimes I can tell what somebody's thinking or feeling before a hearing person might even notice.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But again, some people are easier to read than others, of course.
Well, this is a great opportunity for me. So this is the third generation of Caverlys that I've interviewed. I did your grandparents. Have you seen that interview? Probably not.
Well, I would if it had captions.
Ah, of course. Okay. And then I just did one with your parents. So
Right. How was that?
I thought it was very good. It was a full hour, and and I guess maybe what I should work on are the captions for it, so that you can see that one as well. Good idea. Okay. So if we go back and have you do some speaking parts here, I'm thinking of questions that we already covered that you think you would want to do the speaking part for. I would think one is you're going off to Gallaudet and the difference in conversational patterns that you picked up, and maybe the story of how you got this role in Tribes.
I'm trying to think of what's the best way to begin orating.
Oh, I mean, just carry on just the way you did before. I mean, say the very same thing, except that instead of signing, you voice it.
Okay.
So
I'm trying to think of even where to begin. Where do I want to start? Especially, I'm feeling I'm not the most comfortable speaking. Sign is my dominant language.
Okay, so
I'm trying to think what's the best place to begin. I can talk about, I guess, I can talk a little bit about my experience in Boston. If you want me to talk about that. Okay.
Okay. After I was done with NTD, during the summer I was working at a summer camp, and I got a call from a friend who worked with the director in Boston. Not that friend, she and I. We worked together in Noises off back in Gallaudet. She was my lightning designer, and she was also the lightning designer for the director there. Anyway, she contacted me and said that the director is looking for a belly, so I just wondering if you were available. You should give her a call. So I did. I reached out, and they had me want to come in and do an audition. And at that time in summer camp, I was in Connecticut, and the audition was in Boston. So I took a day off, and me and a friend, we got into a car and drove 5 hours and all the way to Boston. It was the dark, stormy weather, like lightning everywhere. The rain was pouring. It was on and off too. It was like we were driving through an outpouring of the rain, and then it was clear, and then it was raining, and then it was clear, it was raining. Lightning everywhere. It was just crazy. By the time we get into Boston, we got lost. My friend had a GPS on his system, and we put in the address. Okay, so the address, I forgot what's the address. 1234 Huntington Avenue. So we drive there. And then the next thing we know, we're in the bad part of the town. It's just like, slums and everything. We get to the address, it was in a house. It was like, where are we? I couldn't contact the director because, my phone dies. And I couldn't contact them. And so we were just driving frantically around looking for, where's this address? We punched in the numbers again, and we said, where's the address? Oh, it's a different place. Okay. At that time I was already late. My hair was, it was the head, frizzy hair. My beard was like sprouting out, and I was nervous. I was sweating. I was just a nervous mess. And I was just studying my lines, and my friend was driving around looking for a place. When we finally got there, okay, hi, how you doing? And then we did the audition. It was good. I drove back to the summer camp, and then I got an email within the next few days. They asked me if they want me to come back for a callback, a second round of audition. I said, okay. So I took another day off, and I drove back by myself this time. And I didn't get lost, thank God. But I got back and did another round. So everything went smoothly. No problems at all. And then I had to rush back and work by the time I got there. So within the next few hours, I got an email from the theater company saying that I got the role. So.
And a big difference ever since, huh?
Oh yeah, big difference ever since. So.
Good. What about talking about the transition from grade school to Gallaudet, where you had the certain type personality to adapt in grade school, and it was so much different once you went to Gallaudet?
Yeah, okay. I had a pretty intensive hearing background, which means that I was surrounded by hearing people, basically. I had a few deaf friends, I had a few peers, but I just did not have that full signing experience. Growing up in this hearing environment, just always feeling left out in some ways because everybody's talking or interacting with each other and nobody was signing. So of course, some days would be that difficult, especially in schools or social period, cafeteria, that type of thing. It wasn't until I graduated from high school that I went to college. I went to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. and it was just a school for the deaf, basically. And everybody signs. Everybody. Teachers, students, postal office workers, the cafeteria workers, everybody signs. And I thought to myself, this is where I belong. In this hearing environment, in the deaf environment, it's different. Because when I was in this deaf environment, about part of their community, part of their signing community, and it was amazing. But when I get back home, that's when I started feeling deaf. You see, back at Gallaudet, you don't think about being deaf, you don't feel deaf. You just feel like this is part of me, this is part of my tribe. In this hearing environment, you feel different because of the language, because of the accessibility that you have. So of course it's different, and it's a life-changing experience for me personally, especially with the hearing background that I have growing up in this mainstream, everybody talking, and I'm learning how to adapt, separating, talking with them, and having interpreters with me all the time in school. So got that. I didn't have to worry about that.
Is your relationship with Colleen any different than it is with your other siblings? Because she's also hard of hearing?
Well, it's interesting though. When we were growing up, it was 4 guys, Colleen, me, and then my 2 younger brothers, Kevin and Ben. Growing up, she was the oldest, and she was always more mature. While the rest of us, we were like a rowdy bunch, we were always go outside to play, we would wrestle, we would fight, and we would just stay up at night, grooving around in bed until Mom and Dad would have to come up and spank us. So, yeah. So, and she went to a different school than I did, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she went to a different school. I went to a different school because, she had a little bit better hearing, but she can stay for herself. Me, I had to rely on an interpreter. So, and then she had different interests, and I had different interests when we were growing up, So, yeah. However, it wasn't until around high school when we started, exploring our identities, our sense of self-worth, that type of thing. We started to identify and accept that we're deaf, we're culturally deaf, rather than being a disabled person, we were culturally deaf. So we developed a more tighter bond, and then we had the same friends, and so ever since high school we were close pals ever since. So now she's that she studied for her PhD in clinical psychology, so I miss her there.
What about the 2 younger brothers? They're pretty facile with sign language. Do you think?
Yeah, they sign.
Do you think they're going to be using? You think they're going to be using it professionally, or is it just a social thing?
Well, I try to push the idea of them sign professionally, But of course, they require going back to school and I don't think they're interested in doing that. Kevin and Ben, we both developed that bond, growing up as younger bros, the Three Musketeers, that type of thing. So.
And your mother said something to the effect that those two brothers will probably always be Royal Oakers.
Yeah. I think to be fair, Mom, Dad, Kevin and Ben, I think when you look at my family history, my family grew up in Royal Oak, and they still do. They were born there. They grew up there, and they probably will die there. No. Right. They have fun. They know the city. They love the environment, that type of thing. My father practically grew up on the same block where we live right now. So. What? Yeah. So, Kevin and Ben, I don't think they'll be going anywhere. I think they should live in Royal Oak. I mean, if they're comfortable.
Yeah. Well, same thing is true of my family. We had 6 kids in the family, and most everybody lives within 2 miles of the original house. So, yeah. Every once in a while, there's a black sheep in the family, packs up and goes, and that's us.
No, definitely. I could say the same thing for me and Colleen. The two of us, we grew up in Michigan, and Gallaudet is like the mecca for deaf people in America. If you want to go to school, you go to Gallaudet. That's just what you do. So, I mean, for the two of us, it was pack your bags and go. See you later, Michigan. And after that experience, coming back to Royal Oak and coming back home, it was seeing like the great big world beyond Royal Oak was pretty life-changing. We've talked about it. Like, do you think we'll ever move back there? We'll ever go back to Royal Oak? The two of us are like pretty doubtful. I don't think that's on the horizon for either of us. But to be fair, Royal Oak will always be a place where those precious memories of childhood, that's where my roots are, that's where my family is, that's where my history is, and I love it.
I'll wrap it up by asking a couple questions. A couple questions about your video work. I've seen a couple of your videos.
All right.
the Trax station where you met a girlfriend. Tell me a little bit about your video work.
It's called Redline. Redline, yeah. It's just it was just something that I kind of came on a whim. I mean, while I was at Gallaudet, I lived off campus for the last 2 years, so I would have to take the train. We have the subway system, the metro system in DC that I would use to commute to and from school. And I always thought about that idea, like, what if you meet the love of your life one day in a train station? Like, can you imagine, it's just the sheer number of people that you pass. It's always something that has been on my mind. Could one of these people be the one? And I had a friend who was a filmmaker I'd seen some work that my friend had done in class, and we were good friends. And then one day, just kind of out of the blue, we decided, I asked my friend, I was like, hey, what do you think of this? And I pitched it to my friend, and my friend was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's make a movie. So it took about 3 days to shoot, and yeah, it ended up being kind of complicated. We didn't really have the right to control the environment in the station, so trying to police people and keep them out of the shot especially like when trains were coming by. We did some work from like 9 to midnight. We weren't always supposed to be where we were when we were doing what we were doing, but so we would shoot train coming by and get on, and then have to wait for it to get to the next stop, get off, and then wait for the next train to come back coming the other way so that we could get back together and film the next sequence. So like if we trying to get just like one moment could take up to 40 minutes because you had to wait for, you were at the mercy of the DC metro system, and if something went wrong you had to shoot it again, there was another 40 minutes of commuting just to make a shot work. But ultimately the result of that complete film we did on a whim, I decided that I'll just throw it out there to the social media universe and see what happens. And I had a friend who said, why not submit it to a festival? There's a festival called World Deaf Cinema Festival, World Deaf Cinema Festival. And I thought, okay, I mean, we did this on a whim, why not do that? And that was 2010. Yeah, it was 2010 we submitted that. It was like for like a mini short film festival, and it turns out we got accepted, which was fantastic. They would be showing it, up on a big screen for an audience, and people enjoyed it, and that was great. And it turned out we got the award for Best Mini 15. Just this little idea I had on a whim turned out to be this huge, amazing award-winning experience.
So how many were there on the crew? There's you and your friend?
Oh gosh, it was me. It was not a big group of us. Me, my friend who was the filmmaker. We had another one, two more. I had another friend who was also like kind of a consultant or advisor, who was also the bag mule for us. And Colleen was there one night. She came one night just to be a bag mule too.
And the girl.
Right, the girl. Right. Yep.
Did you take many video classes at Gallaudet? Production classes?
At Gallaudet, I took one film class, one video class. That was it. Yeah.
That was video production?
So it was quite challenging.
That was video production?
I'm trying to remember what it was technically called. I think it was just Intro to Digital Arts, something like that.
Okay.
What's the title of the course? Intro to Digital Arts, I think. It was,
That wasn't the driving force for your video, though, huh?
No, that wasn't the impetus for it. I wasn't even. I mean, if I wasn't in that class, though, I never would have met my good friend who's the filmmaker. So I guess you can say it played a role. And I learned a lot about filmmaking through him, rather than from the professor or from the class. It was from this friend who had this passion and this knowledge. The class itself was just okay, but this friend really taught me a lot. I don't think the professor really knew her material as well as my friend did.
Okay. All right. I've got what I want out of this.
Awesome.
I want to thank you an awful lot for taking the time, because I know it's a
my pleasure.
busy session you've got going here. What's next after Berkeley? Do you know?
Oh God, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
I have submitted some auditions. There are some job opportunities on the horizon. It's just a matter of waiting now what's going to come up and when. So it's kind of on pins and needles right now.
Okay. Well, and I'm glad we did that little you during the talking. You have a good radio voice. I think that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you've obviously worked on it, right? Yeah, of course. Okay. Thanks again.